All right, and we are live. Hello, and welcome back to the Gumtree of Liberty Live. I'm your host, Liberty Down Under, and I've got with me today Gerrie. And we thought we'd talk about the reopening of New South Wales and the vaccine mandates down there. So they reopened yesterday, I think it was Monday the 11th, because they hit the vaccine target of 70% of the population who are 16 and over who have the vaccine. So they've decided to start reopening just a week after, just over a week after Gladys Berejiklian resigned. So they've reopening under Perrottet, who's supposedly meant to be. He was supposed to meant to be more anti-lockdown than say Gladys was. But what we're seeing right now with the reopening and the roadmap to freedom that they've put out is that it's really not the case. It's really, business as usual. I don't know what you've seen of it so far, Joe, but from my understanding, it is really, new management, new management, but same policies.
It definitely does. Perrottet has, for the past 12 months, from what I could see, was consistently saying that it's not the government's role to give or take away freedoms. It just wasn't. I think his words were, by default, people born here are free. And when he became Premier, everybody that I was reading about would say, yes, he's going to be different. They were celebrating. That is not the case. That is not what has happened. He continued on with the plan exactly as, and yesterday when I saw him do an interview, I think it was on Alan Jones, he essentially is going for that plan, and it is only the vaccinated, only those people. So he's promoting medical apartheid, which is segregation. It's the same game plan from what I can see. So interestingly too, there have been quite a few stories that I have seen in the last 24 hours, ranging from cafe owners, hairdressers, through to other small businesses who are refusing to open their doors because they will not partake in this sort of segregation. Now, that's only what we're seeing, and that, I think a couple of those were even on the mainstream news. So I have no doubt that there are more behind the scenes. So he is, for me, a big disappointment.
It really is. I think in his maiden speech as Premier, he was basically saying, as you indicated, he was saying that rights don't come from the government. They aren't. They're not given to you by the state. That you already have them. I know as a man of faith, he was making almost a stance that rights come from God, which is a stance that we saw from the Enlightenment writers, who I'm sure you're familiar with, like Thomas Paine and Mills and whatnot. People who are saying rights, they're natural rights, where they come from God, which was a stance. You go back to even under I think you can back under the Stuart Kings of the UK, and all the lawyers are saying, we've got natural rights. They don't come from the state. You had obviously the trial of King Charles I, which was done under the prerogative that the king does not have absolute power. It's all about you already have these rights. Whether they're from God or from nature, you do have these inherent rights. And unfortunately, that seems to be forgotten in the 21st century. Perrottet really is, even after all his rhetoric, he really is doing exactly the same thing as Berejiklian was going to do. It's basically, like, I see it as being almost like a Reagan-style thing. We had, under the 1980s, when we had Reagan in the USA, he was supposedly, all pro-small government in his rhetoric, but in his policies, he wasn't. He was just a standard run-of-the-mill politician. Nothing really set him apart. He didn't really, promote the ideas of liberty like he said he would. And we're seeing the same thing now in New South Wales. I think it's ridiculous. Like, he can't claim to be anti-lockdown anymore because of what we're seeing right now.
No, he cannot. And today, I think it was this morning, when he was interviewed, saying that, although that was from last night, this is short term. This is only a short term plan, and then it will go back. the history of the world will show you, of every nation will show you, that no government who takes power away relinquishes it willingly. It does not happen. And they can't, none of the premiers or even the Prime Minister can lay claim to giving back anything over the last 18 to 20 months. We've gone from bad to worse. It just keeps getting worse. The lies and the deceit keep building up. So they have no track record. It's very disappointing to see Dominic Perrottet take this line. But then in some ways, for me as a historian, actually probably not surprising. So,
yeah. You know, they say to they say to us that they're giving us back our freedoms. That's been the stance by Perrottet, obviously, and I think there was that came recently from Victoria as well. You know, we're giving you back your freedoms. I think it was Martin Foley, who I think is health minister. You can correct me if I'm wrong there. I think he's health minister
in Victoria or in New South Wales. Yeah, Martin. Yes.
Martin Foley is the Victorian health minister, and he basically said to you that, you know, if you are not vaccinated, the freedoms that they're going to give their citizens down in Victoria, you won't have them in the same way that those who have the vaccine are going to get them. And I think that's really worrying to see that you're saying them that they're blatantly saying, you know, it is going to be you either have the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah, and Gladys Berejiklian came out and said that some weeks ago, those very words. The other thing that is worrying about Dominic Perrottet is some of the language that is being used is that today I read that New South Wales people have earned their right to their freedom. Earned? Since when do citizens have to earn the right to freedom? That language should really send shockwaves through everybody. Sadly, too many people don't value freedom, don't seem to care for freedom, let alone understand what it means. When I read words like that, it sends chills down my spine. Earn freedom. They've earned, so it's earn and a reward. It's an earn and reward system that we are now living in. And to me, that's unacceptable.
Well, it's not really a new thing. As you and I were talking about when we did the live stream with C.D. McRae, I brought up Potter and Minahan, which is a 1908 court case, 5 years after the High Court of Australia was created, and 7 after the creation of Australia. It was obviously heard by the original 3 High Court justices, who were all helped to write our Australian Constitution. And you had O'Connor, who was one of those 3, and he basically said, you don't have the right to freedom of movement. It's you have it. You can, like, even Australian citizens can come and go from the country as they please, except when the law says they can't. So it's been the stance right from day zero in Australia that, rights, you have them when it's convenient for you to have them. That's really been the stance that we've seen right now.
Yeah, that's right. I had a conversation, I was late last year with someone who they're not practicing law anymore, but they were a lawyer, and he described to me a system of what they called a hierarchy of rights, which again was another thing that sent chills down my spine, a hierarchy of rights. But it all came back to this whole, that the government in the end, he said to me, you have a right to preserve your own life, but you also have an obligation to protect the whole community. So I think what has surprised me, especially from, we're talking about a Liberal government now in New South Wales, that they've gone from holding liberty they claim so dearly to becoming collectivists overnight. That is, like, the Liberal Party are non-existent. They're the name that shouldn't even be in the title. The word Liberal should not even be in the name anymore.
I think it's embarrassing for them because they chose the name Liberal. If I think so. I think it's because they wanted to, have the ideas of what we now call classical liberals, which were at the time still liberals, but classical liberal ideas, which we really haven't seen. If that's classical liberalism, then then we're screwed. If what we're seeing right now is anything remotely libertarian, we are really, really, I guess there's no way out. But
no, they like to
they
talk
don't they haven't earned that title. They have no right to call themselves liberal.
No, they have none, and they like to talk about John Stuart Mill, refer to all those people. They don't refer to people like Thomas Paine so much, but they love to bring up John Stuart Mill. It could not be further from any of those political thinkers. Well, back in those times, they were all trying to work out ways where people could live together in harmony, but it was of the do no harm principle. Live your life, do no harm. The Liberal Party don't exist anymore. They just don't. There's nothing that has shown to me that they have any basis to stand on. And meanwhile, I don't know where our Liberal Prime Minister is. I mean, he stands by and doesn't say much, if anything, about the New South Wales citizens now having to live under an apartheid system. Just when he was just as silent with what was going on in Victoria. So it is deeply disturbing as somebody who came from that side and supported a definitely more classical liberal but very much libertarian thought. It's a concern.
Yeah, the reason why they refer to Mill over Paine is Paine's more individualist, whereas Mill's utilitarian. So they do, if they refer to people like Mill, then they do have that reason to say, it's for the greater good. They do have the ability to appeal to that. I guess from more from a theory base, they can. Whereas Paine is much more, anti-state and individualist than Mill is. But I wanted to touch briefly on. Sorry, yeah.
No, I was just going to say that is a good point. Even though Mill does often talk about property rights and all that sort of things, which are being impinged on. Really, all of our rights are being impinged on right now in New South Wales. It goes to everything. But you're right. That's the point that they go to.
Well, the idea is that you do have property rights are supposedly meant to be, absolute property rights. Like all the common that we have in Australia and all the statutes say, you have the exclusive right to own and control your property. Except that's not what we're seeing right now. I wanted to briefly bring up the current public health COVID order that's in place for New South Wales, which has some really, I guess, worrying language from more of a legal and rights mindset. I'll link this in the description below so people can actually read this for themselves and read exactly what we're dealing with here. So I'll just go through the list of premises that are closed to people who don't have the vaccine. So you've got high risk premises, which is quite broad. Businesses premises that are hairdressers, spas, nail salons, beauty salons, waxing salons, tanning salons, tattoo parlors, or massage parlors, indoor recreational facilities, public swimming pools, information and education facilities, which includes schools. So therefore your teachers have to have the vaccine. Retail premises, if they aren't critical retail premises, like obviously you can't say to the people you can't go buy fruit and veg. So, but anything that isn't, essential food and the likes, you can't be there and be unvaxxed. Business premises that are auction houses, and also ones that are betting agencies, gaming lounges, and so those last two basically mean pubs. You can't go to a pub because you've got the gaming lounge and betting, which also would then expand and also include any sporting facilities. So you can't go watch the races because obviously you're going to have betting involved there, so you can't go into that part of any sports facilities. Then you've got markets that don't predominantly sell food, so you can't go to you can go to your farmer's market, but you can't go to any other market really. And then finally, properties owned by the National Trust or the Historical Houses Trust. But that last one's not as actually it's much important right now. But they're going through that list. It's most of what we would consider to be more essential services, with a couple of exceptions, but it is, very very much broad strokes when it comes to the vaccine mandates. And then there is an exception to this. So before I go to the exception, I will point out that looking at the definitions from the vaccine mandate, a person who is vaccinated is defined as someone who is totally vaccinated. Oh, sorry, no, an unvaccinated person is defined as someone who is not fully vaccinated,
Yeah.
but they don't define what it means to be fully vaccinated, which is a problem, because because that definition comes from other medical guidelines. But what it means is that once they start bringing in mandatory booster shots, then a person who's fully vaccinated must have booster shots to meet the definition. So
Well,
by not defining in this mandate that you have to, if they're setting the mandate, you have to have 2 vaccines, you have to have both of
yes.
the vaccine, then you'd have you define guidelines. But right now it's very ambiguous as to what exactly a person who's fully vaccinated is. So it does mean that when they bring in booster shots, because there's no definition and guidelines in the mandate, it allows them to change it however they want. However, as soon as they decide to change the meaning of the word vaccinated, it really does mean that it is very ambiguous, and it gives them basically limited power to, if they change that, as you're saying, basically medical apartheid.
Well, it is medical apartheid, and I read today that it's putting a lot of strain, which is not surprising, on businesses, and they really don't know. Some of them are very afraid to where the goalposts are in what they can ask, what they can ask people. So I've been hearing and being told, sent messages from different people I know in New South Wales, what a mess that it is, because I mean, the stress that it's placing on businesses, or particularly small businesses, which seems to be what the target market is, because the bigger ones aren't being aimed at. Although I did get a message from someone today whose friend lives in regional New South Wales. I don't know the town, they didn't say, but their Woolworths won't let them in if they're not vaccinated. So I don't really know how that's working. If one Woolworths can do it, how that's working.
There could be local government guidelines that would apply there. I don't know that I guess there could be local, or we could have a state government that the state government could have a mandate in place just for that area, that would stop Woolworths and other food chains from letting them, obviously buy groceries and whatnot. So that is possible there. That the government will obviously mandate very specific areas and try and control that. But I did want to briefly touch on.
How would they do that? How would they be able to just pick and choose various areas, different areas, to do that?
Pretty easily. Well, we saw with the original.
But I mean, constitutionally, how would they be able to, or legally, or what terminology do we use here anymore? Anyway, mandates under laws.
Well, mandates are regulations. So mandates are created under the authority of statutes. So they tend to be regulations. So they're one level below statute. I think from memory, I haven't touched on statute and regulation differences in a while. But from what I have seen so far from New South Wales, how they'd be doing it is they'd be arguing along the lines of, well, we saw with they locked down the Greater Sydney area, but nowhere else originally. So it does appear they do have the authority to target certain areas based on an area that's at risk. Obviously, you have the Biosecurity Amendment right now. I don't remember its full name. That allows for the human biosecurity orders to be made. That hasn't been passed yet because there was only because Parliament didn't sit for most of September, so I don't think it's been passed yet. But the basic idea behind it was they could create human biosecurity orders for certain areas that could, basically mean that. So the idea behind that was, as you and I've discussed before, is that basically that if you're coming from an aeroplane or by sea, they can put a order just on that individual plane or boat to require everyone who comes from that vessel to be isolated or whatever. So obviously there is some sort of legal basis there, or you'd probably have legal battles otherwise. But even then, we don't know how the courts would because I think the cases involving Brett Hazard are still ongoing. I don't know if they've included those yet. It would be interesting to see what happens with those cases, but I have not heard a conclusion yet about Brett Hazard, who's the health Minister of Health for New South Wales. I haven't heard yet what's happening with those cases, but yeah, because of how it works with regards to legal authority, I think they can lock down certain areas, which is what we have seen. Every state's done that. WA did that to Perth. That happened to Melbourne. Happened to Southeast Queensland. It's happening all over Australia. So there has to be some sort of legal basis there for them to be able to do that. Otherwise, you would have some serious anger from a lot of lawyers, in particular, if they're abusing the law to that extent. Obviously, we do have some lawyers who are angry right now with the level of abuse we're seeing right now, but if you do try and abuse the law that much, you're going to have a lot of outcry from people who are more of the legal profession, because that, I guess, it does depend, because we also have seen some lawyers who are backing up the lockdowns and the mandates. So I guess it depends on who you talk to, really.
Yeah,
then we do have a few law firms who are hoping to represent people who help. For example, the cases against Brett Hazard, you have law firms supporting them, but you also have law firms who are pro mandate, and they're bringing in their own mandate. So I guess it really depends.
yeah,
it'd be interesting to see what happens in the next 6 months. Sorry, yeah.
I hope we don't wait. I hope we don't have to wait 6 months. But the other thing that comes to mind is journalistic integrity. I still am, completely stunned that even after all this time, there are not journalists actually asking opposing questions. That they're just
we have seen a few here and there. There was that big one in the last month when Lee Sales, as an ABC reporter, asked Dan Andrews, was critical of him. And obviously you've got Sky reporters who were very critical of Dan Andrews, at least. Less so of, it depends who you talk to from Sky. Some of them are going to criticize both sides equally, and some Sky reporters are only criticize Dan Andrews. It depends on personal biases, and I think all of them criticize Dan Andrews more. Yeah, but there is a bit of criticism. Yes, yeah, you're right.
I haven't heard any. I haven't seen any questions that are opposing the way journalists used to do it. It's a following a government-only line, and anyway, it's getting back to the leadership. Nothing's changed. It's the same game plan under a different face. And come December 1, when apparently it's going to all be reopened, well, that is going to be interesting to see how that's done. And I'll be watching sort of if they do it, the language and the way that it's framed, because as I said earlier, I haven't seen that done before, where a government will willingly relinquish the power they have taken. So it will be a first, when it will be hard to believe if it happens.
Well, obviously as well, I want to go back briefly to the mandate as well. I've spent my lunch break today reading the mandate in preparation for the live stream. So basically, they listed the reasonable excuses to break stay-at-home orders. The problem there is it says these are the reasons. It doesn't say reasons include. So if it said reasons include, it would be, inclusive. So it's those reasons plus other reasons that are similar.
Yes.
If it says these are the reasons, and it's exclusive, these are the only reasons that you can use. So they are really setting that they're being ambiguous elsewhere. So they got the high risk premises, which is a bit more ambiguous. But here, they're really cracking down and saying these are the only reasons that you can use to leave stay-at-home orders.
So
which I
they
think
have
is quite
absolutely.
worrying.
It is worrying because there's no concept of anything unforeseen happening. There are so many things that can go wrong. You're in your house and things happen that you have to leave. I mean, where's the humanity? It's this is almost bordering on inhumane. It really is. That is
I
not
know,
real life.
yeah.
That is not life.
I
That is not how real life works.
I know where the humanity is, or where they claim it is, and it's a very, very small part of the mandate. This is your exception to the mandate. Okay, it's if you are if you're 16 or over, this is your exception to the vaccine mandate. Right, you've got to meet 4 steps. Step one: the premises where you are must be outside of the Greater Sydney area. Step two: where you live must be outside of the Greater Sydney area. Step three: you must have 1 dose of the vaccine. And step four: you must be there for work. So that's the only exception to the vaccine mandate. So for the places for all those places are listed before, this is the only exception to go to those places. It must be for work, and you must have 1 jab, and it cannot be in the Greater Sydney area.
So if your mother or your child or your another family member who's outside of the local government area collapses or has some sort of episode and you're the only family member, can you go there? Or, I mean, that's just one example off the top of my
Oh no,
head.
so you can, because that'll be at someone's house, and there's no mandate in place for visiting people's houses yet. If there's a stay-at-home order, compassionate grounds are a reason to leave. So there is no vaccine mandate visiting homes, and if you want to visit, if there's a stay-at-home order like we have seen in the past, a reason to leave is compassionate grounds. Although compassionate grounds is again quite vague, and it has to be authorized. You'd have to be able to get exemptions, I guess. I have also found the definitions here of high risk premises. So anything to do with entertainment, any big recreational facility, any religious place of worship. So that includes any mosque, any church, including Parate's own church, interestingly, hospitality venues, and any significant events, which include your weddings or funerals or other important other similar ceremonies. So you can't go get married without the vaccine.
Well, it seems to me you can't live. You can't live. They have regulated life within an inch of its life, if that's the right way of saying it. It
Yeah.
actually calls to mind, I read something, was it yesterday, Tony Abbott had said on the weekend that what they're doing is stopping people from living in order to prevent them from dying. Uh, it, it, they're regulating life. They're regulating our right to breathe. This is not life. It is not.
Well, in one case, they did. During the lockdowns a few months ago, there was a guy who left his house to get the breath of fresh air in his car. The police were doing the rounds, door knocking, knocked on his door. He wasn't home, waited for him to get home, then fined him for getting a breath of fresh air in his car.
Yeah, I heard that story. I've
Which
heard,
I think
yes.
is ridiculous.
It is out of control.
Some of the stuff is also so arbitrary as well. So it's currently in place in Melbourne and also in New South Wales that you can't stand up to drink, but you can sit down to drink. So that's currently in place in both areas, in both Melbourne. I think it could be all of Victoria, but definitely Melbourne and also New South Wales. Is you cannot until New South Wales hits 80% vaccinated, which will be in a couple of weeks, I'm pretty sure. You cannot be standing up and drinking. You have to sit down to drink. You can't, which is I think is very, very arbitrary. In the same way that we're seeing with regards to distancing. Over here, it's 1.5 meters. Over in America, it's 6 feet, which is a difference of about 30 centimeters or 1 foot. So it does seem to be very arbitrary, both between countries and also within countries as well. Because I don't understand, why it'd be a difference between sitting down and standing up. I guess maybe breath droplets would travel further if you're standing up. I don't know. But it does seem quite odd that that's actually outlined in the mandate of both states.
It absolutely is. The whole thing is so arbitrary, though. Again, I come back to they're stopping us from living in order to prevent us from dying, as Abbott said. And that's how I see it as well. 20 months on, are we 20 months on now? About 20 months or 18 to 20 months on?
March last year, so 19?
19 months on into this. How justified is all of this? I mean, how these mandates are getting crazier and crazier, and it's robotic. And I am still so shocked that so many people are not stopping and stepping back and asking themselves these obvious, basic, fundamental questions. And I'm shocked more at people that I know that I would have thought would do this and don't do it. So the fear is so high, the fear is so massive that they truly believe that this thing will get them and kill them if they don't do all of these things. And yet here we all are still living. Here we all are 19 months on and we're still here.
We're still fine. But it's interesting,
here.
Like when we had COVID first, we beat it a couple of times, and now we aren't beating it, and we have harsher measures in place. So we aren't beating COVID. We have, admittedly, there is Delta, but the thing is that as viruses mutate more, they become more infectious but less deadly. So although they become more infectious, and that is why we and often places have switched from doing deaths per day to cases per day. But there's also the point by I think it was Stalin who made the point, although it could be falsely attributed to Stalin. But it's basically the idea that losing one man is a tragedy, losing a million is a statistic. Like as deaths, like as soon as you have that one death, like we saw with for example with New Zealand, they had one death, very emotional. Let's lock down.
But I look at if this was the Black Plague, which is the level of hysteria that the mainstream media just dish out day after day, the plague was you'd be walking out your front door over the bodies. It is so out of proportion, and we know it's out of proportion. But so many people are not asking that.
There were no hygiene. Admittedly, there were no basic hygiene practices back then. You had people literally taking dumps out of their windows in their house onto the street below. So it wasn't exactly the most hygienic, and it was very cramped. So I don't think using the Black Death is the best example. However,
sanitation, all of that, yes, absolutely. But there have been that level of hysteria in the mainstream media who have tried to liken it to something like this. That's my point. Absolutely, I was going to say that earlier on about sanitation, different times, all that sort of thing. But the reporting, that is to me bordering on almost criminal in a way, that they would portray that to people who are not getting news anywhere else. It's unconscionable. It really is.
Yeah, I think the where the comparing to the Black Death comes in is it's more useful with regards to COVID zero. Do you know if Perrottet wants COVID zero, or what's his plan there? Because I know the Labor premiers want COVID zero. I think Scott Morrison backflipped on that, and he's more supportive of COVID zero now. I know that Gladys wasn't at some point. Do you know if Perrottet is pro COVID zero?
I don't believe that he was, but judging on what he's doing now with the segregation, it's a day-by-day change. We can't believe anything they say. They don't seem to care that we know that they don't care. Totally numb. It's just totally numb. Politics in this country is down the toilet, essentially.
because my point was I was going to make the point that the Black Death is still around. It doesn't kill people as much, but it is still around. It's what 800 years, mid 1300s, about 800 years, and
Yeah.
the Black Death is still around. We haven't got rid of it, so we can't get rid of. It's unlikely that we're going to get rid of COVID completely. Dr. Kerry Chant, the chief health officer of New South Wales, was saying that we are never going to go back to pre-COVID normal. We are always going to have masks and spot lockdowns, which is interesting because if the vaccine works, why worry about having masks and lockdowns in the future?
Exactly. And to that, my biggest question is to where we're wearing masks for the rest of our lives. How did we survive as a species at all? How did we get here at all? If this one virus, which is a 99.9% survival that most people don't even know they have or recover from, and the majority don't even know they'll have it, how did we, totally disproportionate, but how did we survive as a species with this one little virus is going to knock us all off like that? So none of it makes sense.
Yeah, this is very. I know this is going to sound very blunt, but scientists and historians say we got to where we are today through survival of the fittest. We're now looking down to save the oldest and the weakest. Now, I'm not saying that I'm not saying that we shouldn't, like, I'm not saying we should condemn the elderly and the weak to die, but it is interesting to see all these scientists who said evolution, survival of the fittest. That's how we got to where we are today. We evolved, the strongest survive.
Yes.
And now it's suddenly they're all saying something different. Of course, we should look after the weak and the elderly, but the fact that scientists have suddenly backflipped on that point and they're now saying, do everything we can to save even one life, it is really interesting because you look at Sweden, for example, they have not had any real lockdowns there at all or mask mandates. And I think they have a decent, they're nowhere near the top of the leaderboard for deaths per capita.
Yeah.
I think last I heard the number 45 for death per capita, but they never locked down. Denmark is reopening. You got a few countries in Europe that are reopening that are much smaller than us, that have more people. So the population density there is a lot higher than it is in much of Australia. Yet somehow Australia, with no land borders, wants COVID zero and won't reopen. Of course, you got Queensland and Western Australia who said we're not going to reopen. So Scott Morris wants to. It says when you hit 80%, you have to reopen internationally. Tasmania said 90. WA said 90. Then they're saying maybe even after then we still won't reopen. And Queensland saying not till we're safe.
Sorry,
you go.
It begs the question then, why isn't one journalist asking, why do you want COVID zero? Why? Where is the why? Nobody asks that. Why are they going for it? Because they can't go for it. You can't achieve something like that. It's unachievable. They don't ask the question. I don't hear any questions. I remember a time when journalism was all about questions, like, the fourth estate, keep them all, accountable. None of that.
The Vietnam War.
Why?
Journalism caused it's a big reason why the Vietnam War ended, or at least American involvement in the Vietnam War ended, was journalism. Because they were telling the stories from the ground, which was not what the government was saying. And they said to the people, the government's saying this is actually the reality. And then that helped spur the anti-war movement in America and Australia and across the world. The media have gone from that to very complacent. There are exceptions. I will give them that. But the majority of them, especially those on the left, seem to be very, very much complicit and complacent right now is what we're seeing. And it's definitely the same. It's definitely in Australia. You've supposedly got the Murdoch conspiracy theory that the left is pushing, that Murdoch is behind everything, and there's no one's questioning New South Wales. there's a bit more of an attack on Dan Andrews by some of the media. I don't know the thought. I haven't seen enough headlines to be able to say definitively if it's yes or no. You do see a bit more of an attack on Dan Andrews, but that's because he has had the longest lockdown in the world. So, it is a bit of a bit of an open target there. But you aren't seeing that criticism. You definitely aren't seeing them criticize Gladys Berejiklian at all. The left has been a bit more critical of Gladys, just like the right has been a bit more critical of Dan Andrews. But by and large, they'll criticize the leader, but they still support lockdown. So they don't like how it's being done, but they still want the lockdown to be there. Most of them, left and right.
I still come back to that same question. Why do you want to achieve COVID zero? It posed the question, try to get an answer, which they won't because there is none. You cannot achieve the unachievable. So why? Anyway, it is just a continuous circus, concerning, disappointing. I could pull out so many words to describe the situation of what is going on there, and the things that I've heard especially today from various people I know there, it's very worrying.
So they've spent, from memory, it's been almost 110 days in lockdown for New South Wales, or at least for Sydney.
I think they said 100. I think they said 100.
Yeah, which is around the same amount as Victoria's lockdown for the big one last year. So it's about the same. Which it's funny that the left criticised Gladys Berejiklian and said, Dan Andrews is so much better, when in the end they both had their 100-day milestone. Dan Andrews did get COVID. He did eradicate COVID faster than New South Wales, but I think he was going to consider the population issue there as well. With regards to
So what's going to happen when they fly in these? Is it how many thousands? 2,000? Is it 2,000 workers, healthcare workers, to replace the ones who have left, or is it more than that? Are coming flying from overseas? So
I strongly and despise the stance on healthcare workers. So for those who don't know, the Australian government is flying in 2,000 nurses, vaccinated nurses and doctors from overseas, to plug the gaps, because we don't. For example, New York State, they're using the National Guard. We don't even have that. So they're using foreign healthcare workers, which is really interesting that we're using the healthcare workers as the lockdowns had, for how bad they are. I think the cases are going down. Whether or not that's sort of the lockdowns is another story, but the cases are going down now. They're on the decline. Why bringing those healthcare workers now? Why not bring them in earlier? If they really want to, stop the spread and flatten the curve, why not bring them in at the very start? Why bring them in now? Why wait till the vaccine mandate to bring them in? Why not, after a week, get more healthcare workers from, say, it doesn't seem... It seems weird that it's now that they're bringing them in, but also the fact that they're mostly from the UK, which has had several major pandemics of COVID, several major breakouts, plus from people I've spoken to from England. I know we had a few weeks ago we had the live stream with Indubitably and Lady Alice from England, with me talking about how it's been over there. I was telling them about the fact that their healthcare workers are being sent over here. And they started complaining because they were like, well, the NHS is so bad as it is, which is their version of the public healthcare system. It's so bad as it is. And the left is complaining about it, especially in America, especially in the UK. Especially the left is angry about the NHS, but it's all across the board. No one thinks it's perfect. And yet people aren't complaining about the fact that, there are healthcare workers coming to Australia from the UK, which needs them, obviously, because their system is quite bad as it is. From what I've heard from people who are over there, the NHS is not great, but yet they're losing their medical workers, and they're coming over to Australia as COVID's dying down this time. Of course, we're going to see COVID come back again. It is going to come back. I don't think it's going to end here. It will come back somehow. So the question is, how long do we keep? If we're going to have masks and lockdowns forever, do we keep these doctors and nurses here forever? Like, what do we do in the future? Bringing in doctors and nurses. If Dr. Kerry Chant, who by the way hasn't even been in the medical profession, she's a bureaucrat. She hasn't worked in hospitals apart from obviously like work experience and stuff like that. She's been a bureaucrat most of her life. The fact that people like her are saying, we're going to have lockdowns for as far as we see into the future, we're going to still have lockdowns and masks. If that's the case, why are we doing stopgap measures? Why not build the infrastructure to deal with that? Why bring in healthcare workers from other countries? We can't do that every time.
No, they can't.
But
the other point is that
we asked. Sorry, yeah.
They're flying in from overseas. Yes. So is that, if we're having the numbers down here, is that going to make the numbers go up? Are they going to say that because there's 2,000 new arrivals from overseas? There's all of that as well. Apart from the fact that they let it's a pandemic, is it? But they can let 2,000, or I don't know how many thousands of people, actually, it's more than that, have left because they refuse to get the vaccine. Why would you let them go in the middle of something like this? But then I'm asking all these very sensible questions.
I mean, they are using the camps as long-term infrastructure. They haven't, in fact, the federal government said that the camps, at least the camp in Brisbane that they're building federally, is going to be used after COVID. So they are building the COVID camps, but, I don't think building camps is probably the best way to go about it. It's definitely not good it's not a good optics, at least, building, at least calling them even camps is like, it's not the best optics, I'd say. Because it does mean they are being called like the quarantine camps are basically, some people are calling them like basically like detainment camps, basically.
Well, that's right. But the other question is, even because a lot of people make reference to the Spanish flu did end, as all viruses do. They do end. Why are they building these? This will end.
Because we're going to have COVID forever. They're building these camps because we're going to have COVID forever. They're using stopgap measures now, but then the idea is to eventually. I think we have 3 camps, two in southern Queensland, 1 in Victoria. So we have 3 camps right now, which isn't like, you think they want to have camps in every state and territory, which I think is the long-term plan there. But there have been, rolling them out only in the Labor states so far, where there's going to be more support for them, which is interesting. But then, of course, building the as I've rented about before, they're building one of the camps in Queensland near Toowoomba to make us comply because we don't have high compliance rates. So the question is, are these camps political or are they medical? That line has become very blurred.
But based on the past, it can't be, because they die out. All these things die out. I mean, to say that we're having it forever, that's what they're saying. Gee, they're smart, aren't they, that they know that we're going to have this forever. I mean,
we do still have we have the Black Death, though, so we will have it forever.
But societies keep going on. They get through these things. If it was, after the Spanish flu, I mean, of course, there was another war, and then people's, it's not so much poverty as nutrition, all of that suffers. And then we build up again. We build our resilience. If we're told, not that those of us who care enough need to be told, but if people need to be encouraged to look after themselves better and all of that sort of thing, so clearly they don't want that to happen. Life does go on after these things. We have an immune system for a reason. This is insanity. This insanity. Life does go on. These things end. The camps are, as you said, a terrible optic. Terrible. But, yes, anyway, so back to with New South Wales, no, it's the same game. and we'll wait and see what December 1 brings.
Yeah, but like even the fact that like in New South Wales, basically, you're not allowed to like even dance or anything like indoors. As far as I know, dancing and singing indoors is banned. Even for those who have the vaccine, you can't sing in. Like, I think there's exceptions for like schools and stuff, but like at obviously like when you're at the club or at the bar or whatever, at the pub, you can't do karaoke nights because singing and dancing is not allowed indoors. It's allowed outdoors, but not indoors, which is about as arbitrary as the whole standing up, sitting down to drink thing.
Well, and as arbitrary as saying, how are we even still here? It still comes back to that. The virus doesn't know, oh, it's that height, that height. I mean, the whole thing is insanity. Anyway, so
I think we've covered New South Wales pretty well. Anything you want to add before we finish up?
No, I think we've covered all that pretty well. And we'll wait and see what December 1 brings. We'll keep an eye on that.
And wait to see what happens on November the 2nd when Victoria looks at reopening. Did you hear about that? About what Victoria, how they're reopening?
No, I missed that one. No, I didn't.
No.
I was focused on New South Wales.
We have the Melbourne Cup coming up on November the 2nd, and that's being used as a trial run for reopening for Victoria. 15,000 people will be allowed to watch the Melbourne Cup.
Allowed.
All with the vaccine. So you have to that they've got very, very strict laws there as to who can go watch it. I think they'll have like the 2 square meter rule for spacing or whatever like that. Or is it 2 or 4 square meters? They keep changing that around. Is it 2 or 4 square?
Well, normally they
depends
use
where you are. Sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 4, sometimes it's 1.5 meters. It's a bit interesting as how they keep changing that around. Obviously, like it's because it is weird how they. Obviously, they're going to say like when certain spaces. If it's outdoors, I think outdoors it's 4 square meters, and indoors outdoor it's 2 square meters, indoor it's 4 square meters. I think because it's outdoors versus indoors, and they always try be a bit stricter indoors with COVID measures. But what they've said is the reopening. That's going to be the trial run. They have literally said the trial run is going to be the Melbourne Cup. 15,000 vaccinated people go watch it. If you don't have the jab, you can't go, which is about as bad as the NRL grand final, where Palaszczuk said basically, she told the NRL to the last quarter of people who bought tickets can't go. So if you were in the last quarter of people to buy tickets, you had your tickets refunded. Although interestingly, she still went to the game. So which is interesting that she says to us we can't go, but she goes herself. And so I want to see what happens with Melbourne Cup if Dan Andrews gets invited to go to that. And
I don't think he goes. Nobody sees him in public, so I'm not sure he goes anywhere.
When we see him in public, he's not wearing a mask at least.
No,
was that twice last week.
We'll see what happens with over the next couple of weeks with that as well. Yes. Okay.
Right, I think we'll finish up then.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
It's been a bit of a late live stream. Only 2 of us as well. No worries.